the Corrine Barraclough show. Coming up, I'll be speaking to a criminal lawyer who wants to blow the whistle on anti-male gender bias in the Australian legal system. I'll have a rant about left-wing activists pushing for free childcare, again, and Emma Watson cops a spray. But first, I want to talk about child support. I asked this question on my Facebook page. Do you think DNA testing should be mandatory before fathers are made to pay child support? I had hundreds and hundreds of comments very quickly. The vast majority of people, men and women, said yes, DNA testing should be mandatory before fathers are made to pay child support. Andrew wrote, actually, I think that a father should be able to opt out of paying child support as soon as a woman becomes pregnant, as long as they agree not to be part of the child's life. There are women out there who entrap men as fathers who don't want to be. He's correct there, I've spoken to plenty. Brett says, well, I would want to have the option to request a DNA test. Some men are quite happy to take responsibility for children, even if the children aren't biologically theirs. Laura said, not mandatory, but readily available if requested. That was a common answer, and the recurring theme seemed to be that men should not be forced into many years of child support, substantial financial commitment without DNA proof of fatherhood. Brett said the whole system needs to be reworked. Sharon said, definitely it's common sense. Alicia said, no, but it should be an option that's enforceable by either party if they want it. And Julie said, they check everything at birth, so why not check the DNA too? Well, obviously there's a cost to consider there, but in principle I agree. Gary said, a relative of mine is an anthropologist. He told me statistically around 30% of babies born are from someone else jumping the fence. We have discovered relatives that we never knew of after doing DNA tests. 30%? That's a shocking statistic. Now, I was going to interview Faith, mother of Jary Wise, who was murdered in March of this year. She's still incredibly traumatised, totally understandably, after losing her son. So instead, I want to read you some of what she's written to me. Her voice is really important, and this show is not about perfection. It's about honest truths, no matter how they're delivered or how shaky someone's voice is. I asked Faith how she was coping. She said, I have my good and bad days. This isn't so terrible, as it initially was minutes by minutes and then hour by hour. That is very exhausting and incredibly difficult to hide from your children. Jary was a long, lanky, smiley, yet incredibly shy man. You would hardly hear a word out of him until he had a beer or two. With the tipsy came the confidence. He was a beautiful dad, not only to his 2 biological children, but also to the children that his partners had to previous relationships. He took to parenting without skipping a beat, which is something I'm so incredibly proud of. He couldn't hold a note, but he did like to party and dance. Many nights we'd have a gathering, and him and I would be the last 2 dancing, songs that were ours played at his funeral. Through our tears, we danced him down the aisle to the hearse. Jary's funeral was one of the largest the funeral parlour had ever had. The people he touched spilled out into the car park, just another sign of how much he was loved. There was an AVO out on Jary's girlfriend, Melissa, at the time of his murder, and on that, Faith says, I was well aware of the order on Melissa as she had attempted to stab Jary just a month or so prior to running him down in her van. Jary called the police for help, and in the early hours of the morning they brought Jary and his 5-year-old son to my door, saying there had been an issue and that Melissa needed to calm down. My little grandson was dry-reaching with fear, and Jary's clothes were torn. I know without a doubt that had my son tried to stab Melissa with a child in her arms, he would have been locked up with no bail. Family services would have reached out to assist with any help needed with the child, and it would have made it into the media. Pussy pass. I found the trousers he was wearing that night not long ago. He'd hidden them. I'm guessing he felt shame. Had she been arrested and held without bail, my boy would still be here with us. The court date for this assault was just after she murdered him. I stood up in court on one occasion and asked the magistrate if I could speak freely. He allowed me. I asked him his thoughts on Melissa being on bail while being on charges of assault, that's attempted stabbing, and killing her victim before the court date of this offence. His response was that he understood that this is a difficult time for me, but he doesn't have that file in front of him, so can't comment. Go figure. I'm quite lucky that I live in a small town where everyone knows everyone. I have to say that our local police have been lovely. They've even told me that on occasion they knew something terrible would happen. They'd been called so many times and removed Jary as Melissa wanted him gone, not due to his violence, but hers. I was told by one officer that their hands are tied, that they do their job, deliver the perpetrator to the magistrate, and that's the end of the story for them. The Duluth model is their handbrake. A woman calls the police and it's ticked as domestic violence. A man calls and it's a disturbance, pussy pass again. I've had so many messages from families and in particular men saying thank you for my post about domestic violence not being a gender issue. There is no equality in the justice system. If a man punches me in the face, I'm an innocent victim. If a woman punches a man in the face, he must have done something to deserve it. It sickens me to my core. We're shown from a young age that violence towards men is okay. A slap in the face in a movie gets a giggle. Imagine the uproar if it was a man slapping a woman. There would be no laughing. There was no candle-lit vigil for my boy, and no crowds of 100 gathered. He was murdered by a woman, and people aren't interested in these hellish stories. They're hushed due to the gendered narrative. Our family has the kookaburra as our family bird. We've always said, when times are tough, or even at the best, if you hear a kookaburra, then the ones you love are near. Never have I loved that bird's laughter more. Faith, so much love to you, and I look forward to continue working with you on raising awareness on these crucial issues. Now, continuing this theme of gender bias in the legal system, my interview today is with a criminal lawyer from Sydney who contacted me as he wanted to discuss, and his words, women playing the system to get revenge. Samir Banga is the director of Sydney-based firm Banga Legal. Samir specialises in criminal law as well as family law, allowing him to provide insight into the overwhelming overlap between the two jurisdictions. He's been involved in numerous high-profile cases, in addition to representing clients from all walks of life. Let's listen to what he had to say. So you contacted me because you wanted to discuss how the system is, and then in your words, being used for revenge. Can you tell me what you mean by that, please?
Look, obviously the first thing to put down or to put on the record is that this is not everybody, and there obviously is genuine matters of domestic violence. There's been a problem for years, and it's not just going to go away like that. I find what the problem is right now, or what the inequalities in the system right now tend to be, that it's being used by certain people in certain circumstances to gain an advantage, whether that's family law proceedings or whether that's basically to get the upper hand on their partner. A number of cases I've had in the past couple of years have been domestic violence related. And the issue I've seen systematically is that it's been used close to family law proceedings or just prior to it to try and gain that advantage. The people that are affected the most are the children. But as with family law matters, you also find that that's a secondary consideration, I should say.
Yes.
In the end, it's two parties who end up warring. It might just be a war of words. It could be a war of words over a period of time. They might be separating. They might just have issues in their marriage or relationship. And that ends up being taken out by either side. And typically, at least in a number of cases that I've seen, it's been the female who's used it against the male. I'm sure it happens the other way, but I haven't really had as much to do with that as I have on the flip side.
So are you saying that some women, and of course, you know, we all want to see perpetrators held to account. So we're not talking about the genuine cases, but we're talking about people who do the wrong thing. Are you saying that some women sometimes are weaponizing the system?
100% yes. That's exactly what I'm saying. And I have no issues with stating that on record.
Yeah.
You are finding this more and more, at least with cases, not just that I'm dealing with, my colleagues are dealing with. So I'm a solicitor, I work with a number of barristers, I have a number of, colleagues who are in criminal law as well, and family law. And we're all seeing this used as a tactic. So, like I said, sometimes it's just before the family law proceeding, sometimes it's not. It's not always involving kids. Sometimes it just may be a relationship that's gone sour. A case that I just recently came into contact with, we managed to produce evidence the other way, and that's how it ended up going away. But not everyone sits there tallying up their evidence going, okay, we had a fight now, this is how it happened, there was a verbal altercation, she might have thrown something at me, I didn't do anything, and had such a tabled response. Some people will just let it be, like, to them it's done, let's move away from it. However, when the other party then decides, okay, I've had enough, I'm going to call the police, the context is no longer relevant. What happened in the background is no longer relevant. So yes, I think you're right. The short way of saying is yes.
No, it was a good answer. Do you think then that, as you're saying, people all around you within the legal system, would lawyers representing females know how to play the system? Do you think that's commonly going on behind the scenes?
Unfortunately, probably yes. I don't want to sit here and say yes because that's, I guess, denigrating some of my colleagues. But I do believe that would be the case, especially with certain lawyers in the family law field. One of the first questions you tend to get asked is there domestic violence behind the scenes? Otherwise, sometimes their client, a family law client, might come in with those questions already ready or with that information already at hand because they've thought about it or been advised of it from someone else. I do think it can be, and you often see some lengthy affidavits which draw history from maybe, I don't know, 5, 10 years ago and violence throughout the marriage or throughout the relationship. In criminal law, maybe not so much because it's the police that are prosecuting as opposed to the applicant or the protected person or the alleged victim. It's more family law where you might see that tactic used.
Yes, okay, I understand. You said to me in your initial correspondence that you think it's important that people hear both sides. Do you think that there's a gender bias against men in general and in the legal system?
I think that's a hard one to answer. I would like to say no. In domestic violence matters, yes. In family law matters, you often have males that use the word or use the terminology that the system is rigged.
Yes.
Now, I don't want to go that far. I've seen many males that have been treated very fairly by the system and the opposite as well. What we need to understand is the family law system, for example, does not take into account who's cheating, who's doing that type of stuff. The adultery part and the ego is meant to be taken out. It's meant to be essentially simplified on what's in the best interest of the child and then obviously the parties if it's just them two or after the kids are taken care of. So that should be how it's seen. But often you do have cases where the male is not generally the primary caregiver for the children. That can cause a bit of an issue because ultimately the court doesn't want to take the kids away from mum, even if she isn't the best of mothers, and this is just a hypothetical, because mum's taken care of the kids for so long. It's not in the best interest of the child. However, in domestic violence matters in the criminal jurisdiction or the criminal jurisdiction, yes, you often see that males are treated differently. And I would go as far as saying, at least in a number of cases, they are proving their innocence as opposed to how the system's actually meant to work, where the prosecution is meant to prove their case against the defendant. They're meant to prove the charges, prove beyond reasonable doubt, that is too. But you also have AVOs handed out pretty freely these days. You can basically go to the police and say, look, I'm alleging such and such. He might have said this, he might have hit me a few weeks ago. No evidence. Your word of mouth will probably be enough to get an AVO. There's a lot of discretion in the system as well. Now, discretion is on behalf of the police. And what I did, now this is something that I have heard anecdotally anyway, that there is a, I guess you could say a direction or directive to crack down on domestic violence, which is great to a certain point. But when discretion isn't used wisely, and you're merely giving AVOs out because, okay, there's an allegation of domestic violence, we need to take this seriously, that's also problematic. You have many people who are innocent, many people now having to go through the system, spending a lot of money, and this can be thousands of dollars sometimes, and a lot of their resources, taking away from their usual lives, taking away from the care of their kids or their partnership, and putting that into defending their own integrity and defending their reputation. So this is where the inequalities are and that bias would be in the system. It might not be inherently in the law itself, but it's in the way the law is applied, which is very, very different.
Yeah, well, that leads me actually nicely into my next question. So if I'm right, you represent women and men. So I'd be really interested to get your perspective and your insights onto how men are treated differently. If you can give an example of how a woman is treated differently to how a man, for instance, would be in a similar situation.
The way she's spoken to, for one, by the magistrate or judge can be very different. And don't get me wrong, I think sometimes there's a need for that as well. But when you don't apply the same basis to both sides, it is an inequality in itself. What the best example I can give you is a matter that I had probably, I think it's about 3 or 4 years ago. Female basically got upset at her partner because she found some lewd photos on his phone. There was a bit of a verbal argument that she ended up hitting him a number of times. Even he said, look, it wasn't hard and I didn't feel any pain, but yes, she did hit me. She ended up pleading guilty in court because technically that's common assault. She's hit him a number of times. He didn't give her permission to hit him. And that's often why you see that line, I did not give permission for that, or to be assaulted or whatever the case may be. She went to court, went to plead guilty. The magistrate asked her about 3 or 4 times, are you sure you want to plead guilty? Are you sure? Do you understand? Magistrate knew she had legal representation. This was my client at the point, but wanted to confirm that. What male is afforded that same liberty or indulgence? Not many. In fact, I haven't seen it anyway. And that could just be a bias on my part, something I've missed, but no, it hasn't happened. Now, where I will say it's slightly different, I've had a matter or a couple of matters where there was a lesbian relationship. That's where it was slightly different. But in terms of male-female, you typically find that the magistrate will speak in a smoother tone. The voice is different. It's probably not as harsh. It's more conciliatory. With the male, sometimes, look, I do think there's a place for it too, but it's just, it rings a bit of an issue to me, or brings a bit of an issue to light. So that's something that I've directly seen in my experience.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, tell me, you previously worked for a firm where you had, as you described, significant clashes with a female boss. Can you tell me a little bit about what you've seen of quote unquote man-hating in legal firms?
Yeah, look, I guess in the end, this is a personality thing, part of it. And one of the things is I probably have a strong personality. I think a lot of us lawyers do. That's why we do what we do in the first place, because you need that type of personality unless you're in other subsections of the law. But it was turned to me as, okay, you're a woman hater, or you just can't handle having a female boss, which is ludicrous. I have family as well. There's women in my family, and if my mum tells me to do something, I'm going to do it, no matter how old I am. I'm still going to do it. It has nothing to do with control or nothing to do with ego. But often that's now being used as, I guess you could say, get out of jail free card, so to speak. You don't like me. You don't like what I've said. So, there's got to be a problem there. It must be because I'm female. Well, it's not really the case. If you're wrong, you're wrong. I don't care if you're my boss. I don't care who you are. Sometimes you're wrong, just as I'm wrong half the time. I can't say, I don't want to say that I'm wrong. Right all the time. I can't say that I'm right the majority of the time. Sometimes we just talk to our friends or colleagues or whatever the case may be, and we could be wrong. And that could be in any aspect of life, whether it's relationships, professionally, or whatever the case is. So look, I found that to be it was an interesting experience, and it's similar to the race card sometimes, where I feel people of my persuasion or my background can use the race card a little bit too much. So I think it could be that as well. Maybe it's just a way to strengthen your side or your own version of the story.
Really interesting, Sam. It feels to me like that's yet another example of when gender theory and kind of all of this ideologues is kind of wheeled into the workplace. It just brings a whole myriad of problems, doesn't it?
Oh, totally. And I think the issue here is, as males, or at least as the party who I guess is in the weaker position here, you kind of need to be careful. Now, I've seen, and I've had friends tell me about this too, again, anecdotal evidence, but when males have been approached by females, something close, I wouldn't say sexual assault, but something close to that, which would be inappropriate for a male to do, maybe trying to kiss a female, or whatever the case is, at the Christmas party when they're drunk, they would get slammed if they did the same thing. But when the female does it, there's no equal treatment there. They're treated very differently. And in fact, sometimes the males just laughed at it and said, look, deal with it, which is similar to domestic violence, actually. That happens quite a bit too, where the police officers may come to the scene, at least I'm told, and the males are told, look, that's not really a big deal. Do you really want to push the charges? Like, do you really want that? Let it be, move on. Now, again, this is all anecdotal because I wasn't there at the time, standing there, listening to it. But when I'm getting told this by a number of people I'm interacting with, at some point, either the police are lying, or they're lying, or the system's lying to us.
Does that surprise you though? Like that's pretty shocking, isn't it? Because that's not equality. I would say that's actual gender discrimination, just working the other way. Don't you agree?
I do agree. Look, I think ultimately there is some form of gender discrimination. I think it's different in different aspects of the law or in different aspects of life. Like, for example, I do believe, and I'm sure there is a pay discrepancy, inequality. There is inequality in pay and gender bias there, and I'm sure males are paid better than females for the same role, even when the female can perform it better. In fact, an example I can give is in law, you tend to see male QCs or SCs, so Queen's Counsel, Senior Counsel, paid better than female Queen's Counsel and Senior Counsel. However, I am very, very sure the females are bloody good at what they do, if not better. But that could be for other reasons as well, as it's marketing purposes or whatever the case is, the name. However, I do find, taking that back, I do find that that's a genuine issue. But I think some of it gets clouded with what we have, such as domestic violence, which is not exactly the same. Traditionally, I do feel that males were more powerful, treated themselves more powerfully. But instead of coming to an equal footing now, we seem to flip it too far the other way, push it too far and give too much leniency when we really should be relying on our system and going, okay, we need to prove this properly. We can't just take this against the male. We can't just take the female's version of the story. We need to investigate this more. And often there is no investigation. It's a female statement, so it becomes a one-on-one, female against the male. And that's where the gender bias comes in too, because the male often, in at least a number of cases, is slightly arrogant, is slightly egotistical and can't believe what's going on and doesn't present as the best witness either, which, don't get me wrong, it's an issue, but that doesn't mean they're lying. It just means they're, I guess you could say, impacted greatly and their emotions are getting the better of them.
Yes, yeah. Now, before I let you go, because I know you're incredibly busy, but I've got one more question. Do you think the system can be fixed, or is it a question of raising awareness that the balance of justice has swung too far in one direction?
Yeah, I definitely think it can be fixed. And look, I think gender inequality is still in the works, and I'm talking about gender inequality against the female, so female rights and rights for Aboriginals, rights for people of colour like myself. That is something that's going to take time to fix totally, but it is coming to play. It is improving, and it has improved a lot over the past few years, maybe 20, 30 years. I do think this can get better too. This has just been a big flip really quickly, with the awareness, with the community standards changing, and with the community saying to us, okay, we need to fix this. We need real victims protected, and we need people who aren't real victims who are using the system. Maybe they should be charged for using the system, especially if proof comes out. Now, one of my big issues is when you tend to see discrepancies between the family law affidavit in some of these cases and the statement that the complainant or alleged victim provides in the criminal jurisdiction, when that's totally different. Now, that is a clear issue. So obviously she's lied at one point. So if that's the case, then what else has she lied about? And that kind of stuff we should be taking action on. So we need to separate what the truth is from fiction. We need to separate the real victims from the non-genuine victims and actually do something about that. I do think the system can be fixed, but I do think it's something that, as you said, it's about raising awareness and making sure people understand that there is this issue in the first place. It's not black and white. It never is with the law, to be honest, no matter what anyone tells you, at least in my opinion.
None of life is black and white. It's all shades of grey, isn't it? Thank you so much for coming on, Sam. Fascinating to talk to you. I'll speak to you again.
Thank you, Corrine. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.
That was Samir Banga, criminal lawyer. I'll have him back on my show soon to talk more about anti-male gender bias in the legal system. Now, I want to say a few things about these screeching left-wing activists who keep telling me and you that the government should be paying for childcare. The Sydney Morning Herald ran a story saying that cheaper childcare could boost the economy. The author wrote, "Working mums could add $150,000 to their lifetime earnings if the federal government subsidised the cost of childcare more." Now, I pride myself on being pretty respectful on most issues, and I try to see both sides. But on this, sorry, no flipping way. The government doesn't have any money. The government's money is our money, the taxpayer. It's really very simple. Don't have children you can't afford. And finally, let's talk about Emma Watson, aka Hermione from Harry Potter turned feminist activist. The women's organisation ran a quote from her which said, "If you want to run for Prime Minister, you can. If you don't, that's wonderful too. Shave your armpits, don't shave them, wear flats one day, heels the next. We want to empower women to do exactly what they want. Thanks, Hermione, for your permission to wear flats, but I've confidently worn them for the last 46 years in many glittering cities all around the world, no matter what high-powered job I've been in at the time or how high other women's heels were. Not fazed, and I didn't wait for permission. As a child of the 70s, I never thought any doors were closed to me because I'm female. Why have we taught this generation that they're oppressed? Emma Watson wants credit for being a revolutionary feminist without having any revolutionary ideas. Perhaps she missed the history lesson about successful female leaders around the globe. Maybe she was on the set of Harry Potter at the time and skipped class. Down-to-earth, average, hard-working people are sick and tired of being patronised by woke folk with more money than sense. Women, you are not oppressed. Right, that's enough Barraclough now. See you next week. Stay tuned. We've got plenty more goodies coming up on goodsource.news. We've got James McPherson, that show will be out tomorrow morning. And then we've also got Pello Talk Live, which will be Tuesday evening. If you're sick and tired of ABC rubbish, that's a definite must-see for you there. Look forward to seeing you then.
The Corrine Barraclough Show is a production of The Good Source, hosted by Corrine Barraclough. To watch, listen to or read more new media without the social justice warrior narratives or politically correct fact filter, visit goodsource.news. That's good, SAUCE.news. Become a Good Source supporter for exclusive access to live and unedited interview recordings, including the conversations before and after the show.